Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. It's Kyla here, and we have Kristen and Nia and an amazing guest for you guys. We have Mary Johnson with us today. She's the founder of Lift.Run.Perform and a 306 marathoner. So we're going to dive into all things Mary's journey. We're actually going to talk about some surgery stuff, I believe, and momming, training, all the good stuff. So thank you, Mary, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So why don't we kind of dive into how it all started? What got you into running?
I started running in high school as a senior just to get in shape for lacrosse and to get out of gym class.
Nice.
Yeah, if we're being totally honest. And I was a definite rookie with lacrosse, and I thought if I just get fit, if I get in shape, I could, start playing varsity. And we had a really they were state champs when I was there, very competitive lacrosse team. And I had gotten cut as a junior on the varsity team, and so as a senior, I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to make it. And so I joined the track team, and what I didn't expect was falling in love with running. And when it came to be the spring season of lacrosse, I was like, I don't want to join the lacrosse team. I actually want to keep running and continue to stay out of gym class. And so that's really how it began. And I just, the bug had gotten me, but I ended up rowing crew in college, and then got back to running post-collegiately when rowing just seemed to be a little too difficult. And I ran my first marathon in 2010.
Wow. Awesome. And then that, of course, spiraled into a nice, fast 306 marathon.
Yeah. So my first marathon was 3:44.
Wow.
And I can say I didn't necessarily have the bug. I like to run, but I was working in fashion at the time. And I just kept going into these bad cycles of like, I would run a marathon. It was fun. And then I just really go back to the like work party scene of New York City, living as a young 20-something-year-old in the city, got out of shape. And then so the 3:44, I had just missed back in the day when the Boston qualifier was actually 3:40.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I feel old. And so when I had to like look it up, I was like, this Boston thing, I think I'm close to it. So when I saw that I was a few minutes outside of it, I was like, oh, I bet if I hired a coach and truly trained, maybe I could actually make it. So the next year, Boston lowered it to 3:35, and I ended up running a 3:36. So I missed it. And I had hired a coach. But at that point, I still hadn't committed all year round. I got married, took time away, and then fast forward another year or two and stuck with the coach, and finally got my BQ, ran a 3:22.
Nice.
And then that was in 2014. And then I was lucky enough to run Boston the year after the bombings, which was so special. And that was when I ran my first sub 3:10. I ran a 3:08.
Wow.
And that is the 3:08, 3:06. That's kind of like been where I've been stuck for a while, but haven't run a marathon in a long time. So we'll get back to it at some point.
Yes. And obviously your business is called Lift.Run.Perform. So lifting, has that been a part of your life forever? Was that something that got ingrained with your like rowing and all that stuff? Or where did that come into the picture?
Yeah, we did lift in college. I did not like it, actually. Wasn't into lifting. And then I guess I lifted some. So when I left, so I ended up leaving the fashion industry in 2015 and started working at a strength and conditioning facility. And I was lifting somewhat. But I always felt a little out of place. Like I was lifting maybe once a week, whereas the guys there were lifting 3-4 times a week.
Yeah.
And I never really had bought in. And it's funny because Lift.Run.Perform was founded when I was at that stage of my life with lifting, where it was like, it was there, but it wasn't as there as it is now. And after I had my first baby, I was dealing with a lot of postpartum weakness and pain and issues. And I approached my then boss, now friend, at the gym. And I said, hey, can you help me get out of pain? I think if I got stronger, it would probably help. And he was like, let's see what happens. And so he made me a lifting plan, and it truly changed my life. It like, I went from a place of just, running with quirks and nags every single time I got out the door to like nothing, and feeling so good. And then ultimately, my being postpartum with my first, I ran a 10K PR, a 5K PR. It elevated so much of my running, and I felt great. I had a lot of fun in the gym. There was a lot of variety.
Good. Yeah.
So yeah,
that's amazing.
It was a long evolution, but I'm bought in now. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid.
That's awesome. So when he programmed that for you, out of curiosity, how many times a week were you lifting?
I was lifting 3 times a week.
Nice. Okay. And were those, you obviously were able to get those sessions in. So were those like 30-minute sessions, 60-minute sessions?
Typically 60, depending on how carried away he would get.
Yeah.
They could go upwards towards like 70, 75 minutes.
Yeah.
And like this style is all total body. A little, the phases would change just like they would with running. So we would go through what's called hypertrophy. So like a muscle building phase. We go through strength phases. We do different styles. I've learned a lot, and I still have so much to learn from a lifting perspective. But I feel my coach is very, very smart. Does a lot in the strength world. And he's just, to talk shop with him about the nuances of lifting and physiology and all of that is just, it's awesome to have him as a resource.
Yeah.
I would say 3 times a week, 60 to 70 minutes, you can get a lot done.
Yeah. Do you still lift 3 times a week now? Or I know you just had surgery, so prior to surgery.
Prior to surgery I was. And I was like, prior to surgery, I kind of stopped doing anything that could potentially help me not get surgery. So I basically dropped most lower body stuff. I was allowed to do certain patterns such as hinging. So I did some of it, but I was doing a lot of upper body 3 times a week. And right now I'm doing upper body only, just like whatever is approved by my physical therapist. And so he and Mike, my coach, connect.
Nice.
And it's, I think, as a coach and an athlete, that's something that has been hard. Like it's having someone in the strength world connect with your coach in the running world, having a physical therapist, like having all of these really important support people support and like talk about what you're doing in your training. And, if you look at a professional athlete, that's what they're doing. They're talking about the athletes, but it's in order to get that for yourself as an amateur, it's, you have to do a lot of self-advocacy and just being and making the connections yourself too.
And it's time consuming, especially when you have children.
Totally.
It's almost like, whoa. And so Mary, how do you normally encourage your athletes then to lift 3 times a week? I mean, for me as a coach, I know it's hard. My runners just love to run, and I'm very, I encourage strength training as much as possible, but how do you incorporate that into your plans with your runners?
So bottom line is, to run fast, you don't have to lift. And that's ironic because I just sat here like gloating and loving lifting for the past 5 minutes. But you don't have to lift to run fast, and you can run as fast as you want without lifting, but there is a ceiling to it. And I explain that to the people I coach. Lifting can only help, it can help with resiliency. It can help with economy. It can help with also just basic strength and athleticism. The more you can take on as an athlete, the better you can run. The more you can run, the faster you can run. So there's all of these athleticism carryovers that lifting brings that as runners, we forget about unless we actually do it. And so to convert that way of thinking from like, oh, lifting is that like extra thing that we do, to actually thinking, well, lifting is actually part of training, and I can't miss it. It's very similar to nutrition. It's like, if you forget about nutrition, you're going to bonk, you're not going to feel well, things are going to go haywire.
Yeah.
And lifting is actually the same exact way. So that's the angle that I like people taking with lifting. And it's hard. Trust me, I've been there. It's very difficult to do that. And also just to periodize lifting throughout your year, to like back off from running. It's risky because people are like, oh, but I'm going to lose all of the aerobicness that I have from running. And it's not technically, yes, you absolutely will. Your blood stroke volume might go down. Things will happen cardiovascular wise that weren't going on when you were running. However, you have to focus on the priority, keep the goal. And if the goal is to build more strength, to become a better runner, then you are going to have to let running go a little bit. But I will tell you, the benefits can and will come back twofold. So
absolutely.
That's what I try to remind people of. And at the end of the day, you're in charge of your own training, and it's on you to decide how you want to stack it. But I can bring you to the water. I can't make you drink.
Yeah.
That's very spot on too with our nutrition suggestions for clients. We can give them all the information. If it's not implemented, it's not. Yeah. I've had clients ask me that. Can you just come to my house and cook for me and watch what goes in my mouth? No.
Totally.
So, I mean, with the lifting stuff, do you typically suggest that people have solely lifting days, or are people running on their lifting days as well? And if so, how do you suggest they do that, in what order?
It really depends on the phase of training they're in. So if somebody is in a base building phase, for example, so like, let's say you just ran a marathon, you've got a couple of months till you want to start building back for another one. On one hand, yes, kick back, recover 100%. I think that's mentally and physically very, very important. But then get back to work, but don't make it running work. Make it specific to lifting, strength building, perhaps focus on nutrition. Take the little low-lying fruits that you could have been better at within your marathon cycle and get on them. So at that phase, I would usually recommend something like 3 days a week of lifting, and then running can get toned down. I don't necessarily say like, you should be at 75% of your volume or whatever percent. I think at that point, it's truly about balancing what you can. Because I also think there's a mental side too. There is a mental side. It's hugely important. And I think also having that type of break is to have unstructured running is important. I do that with a lot of my athletes who finish big races. I'll say 2 weeks. Here are your run parameters. You don't run more than this. You don't run less than this, and you have fun. And then I will touch base with you, but you have to decide if you want to run, because having that flexibility is part of the training. And so if we're in season, then maybe we're talking 2 times a week of lifting, and the running is most important. So if the lifting needs to drop, that's fine. So I think just based on the phase of training, where we're at in the year, and what somebody's goal is, that will differ how I recommend somebody would add the lifting.
Yeah. And do you, could you give us an example of, like, you mentioned 3 times a week, and I know you mentioned some of your sessions were, it sounds like, was it whole body 3 times a week, or obviously recently solely upper body, but if someone's doing a session, are there more general names of movements that you could mention that you might see or want somebody doing to support running performance that you could mention?
Totally. Well, and I also will say that's what you just said is nuanced too. So like, if you are in season, maybe you're dosing lower body less, or you're dosing lower body less than you would out of season. So, we're using the same muscles lifting as we are running. So be cognizant of that. So perhaps instead of doing 3 to 4 sets of squats, you're just doing 2 sets of squats, or whatever that might be. So think less of like, oh, the program must be static. I must always be doing 4 to 5 sets of something, to down to like, no, I can dose it in. Maintenance is actually my priority. Band work isn't bad. Band work gets a bad rep. There's nothing wrong with band work, but there's a time and a place for it. So maybe that's what you're doing in season. And then prioritize things that would benefit a runner most. So I would probably argue that a squat and a carry and probably like a single leg deadlift or RDL are three of the most important things. But those are primarily, two of those were lower body. Carry is more of a core exercise. So again, depending where you are with training, maybe your priority lifts are going to be a squat, a carry, a push, like a deadlift, or I'm sorry, like a bench press. And that's the other thing. Upper body gets a bad rep from runners because they're like, I don't use upper body. That's not true. We go back to that overall central nervous system tax. So the more we show up, the more we tax our body in the gym, the better of an athlete we're becoming, the more capacity, we're increasing our capacity as athletes. And the more we can do that in the gym, the more we can do that outside of the gym. Like the upper body stuff is not worthless. Is it specific to running? You know, there's something called a law of specificity. Does that apply here? No, absolutely not. But the body is a system. And so if we can tax a particular system to give us more resiliency, to increase what we call our training age as an athlete, hell yeah, I'm going to do that. I want to become a better athlete. I'm here for the long haul. I'm not here for what I'm doing in the next season. So yeah, I'm just trying to sell lifting here. I'm getting carried away.
Getting really good job, Mary.
Yeah. We're all on the same page with you for sure. Do you find with your like female clients, is there ever kind of a holdup or a fear of upper body lifting?
No, but I wouldn't say a fear of upper body lifting. I think people still do think they will get bulky. That's something that whether or not someone wants to admit, they will say. And the reality is, as I'm sure you know here, it takes a lot of calories to get bulky. And so having that happen, it could happen, but probably not going to, particularly if we're combining lifting with cardio. And it's hard though. I'm sure you have seen similar attitudes in your space.
Yeah. And so with the lifting, do you suggest doing those on consecutive days versus non-consecutive days, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Yeah, usually non-consecutive days. Again, depending on where you are in the phase. Like if you are in a running specific phase, then having them on non-consecutive days would be most important, and coupling them on the hard days. So like doing a lift session after a workout, that is still true. I like to talk about more of like 24-hour cycles as opposed to daily cycles. So what I mean by that is like, if you did a workout at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, you couldn't get your lift session in that afternoon, then you do the lift session as early as possible the next morning. So you're optimizing your 24-hour cycles as opposed to getting that in at like 12 or 1 p.m. And then you only have less than 24 hours to recover before your next recovery run.
I see.
So less of like, I'm working out on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. It's more hours. Your body doesn't know days, it knows hours. So that's kind of how I would stack it within the week.
Yeah. I like that. I like the 24-hour cycle outlook. I think that's good. Do you alter, so we'll take a turn towards nutrition now, but do you alter your nutrition, maybe your pre or post things that you consume on a lifting day versus a running day for yourself personally?
Personally, it would depend on how big the running day is. I would say protein goals are always most important. And then supplemental carb goals, like how much carbing up I'm doing, that will differ based on how big the run is.
Yeah. Talking about protein, have you worked with somebody to determine your protein needs specifically?
Yeah. Yep. I hired someone after my first baby to just kind of like, because I was in a really low place. And so I was like, I'm just going to hire the professionals to help me. I have never, it kind of what we were talking about earlier, I had never adhered to any type of nutrition support. I had disordered eating for a very long time, came out of it and was eating intuitively for a long time. But also understood that performance nutrition is a totally different animal. And I had no experience there. So I wanted someone to help me and teach me how to do that. And then also, of course, hired a strength coach. And those are my two like postpartum changes, and both completely changed everything for me.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed like when working with my runners, as much as I love to use the intuitive eating principle, running can be a huge appetite suppressant. And so one thing I noticed when I start working with people is they're not intentionally under fueling, but they are. Most of them are, especially post run, because, you know, you come back from a hot, humid, 16, 17 mile run, and you really don't feel hungry. And then you get busy with your kids and your day, and you're not really taking in the nutrition that you need. So we really focus on, almost making running another or eating another portion of your training, instead of just, eating when you feel like it. Because sometimes you don't feel like it after a long run.
Yeah, that's exactly, similar to lifting. It's like, you have to be so intentional about it. And I think one thing that really helped me was working in a gym with a bunch of guys who really saw food as data points and like literal fuel. And that totally changed my attitude away from food being something that was emotional, something that I used to cope with, and more of like, wait, X equals X and Y equals Y. And if I input this, I feel like Z, and this is amazing. So when I got away from the emotional side of eating and saw it as literal data points and performance fuel, I was like, that my mind exploded, and I felt the best I ever had. And it was definitely a transformation.
That's awesome. And it's that freedom too, I would imagine, from like you're saying, the kind of, you're looking at it in a completely different way. And maybe the brain's not as focused on all the different emotional triggers, like you're saying. When you started working with a professional with your nutrition, was there any kind of like big eye openers that you saw, whether it was like, oh my goodness, I'm way under on carbs, I need to be a lot higher, or protein, or was there any big game changers there?
I first was protein, like just how severely under eating protein I was doing. And I think protein is just the hardest macro to prep and get ready for. And for me, it was lack of preparation, lack of thinking about what I was eating until I was hungry. So it was just taking a step back and being like, all right, I started eating more prepared meals, prepping myself more, taking that angle. And then I personally struggled with eating enough carbs. And I definitely attribute that to just growing up in a carb scary world where we're just like, carbs are bad, carbs are evil. And it's just such bullshit. And you don't like, I didn't even realize how severely under carbing I was. Just because it was like the watching my mother just never, even now I see her at dinner and she's like, she's talking about how she's especially eating carbs on this one day. And it's so, now that I'm so far removed from it, I can see it and be like, oh, hell no, give me those carbs. But it took for me working with a professional to see, wait,
well, because the media does not help.
Absolutely.
I know when I trained for my first marathon, this was probably, 15 years ago, but everything was low carb. Like you'd open like Shape magazine, Self magazine, and it was like low carb. And I didn't necessarily think, well, I'm a runner, I need carbs. I was like, well, they're not eating carbs. Why would I eat carbs?
Right.
And, I ran myself into the ground with it. I felt great until I did not feel great. And, I got a stress fracture, obviously. So it's so good that we educate our athletes with, this is performance nutrition. Carbs are for performance. And if you want to perform, if you want longevity in the sport, then it's a huge piece of the puzzle.
That's where the seeing it as data really helped me, because it was like, I'm not intuitively selecting carbs. just because that's how I've been conditioned. It's not even, it's subconscious at this point. So to have a carb goal to make sure I'm having enough to feel my best, how could I not want to do that?
Yeah.
So I think, again, especially knowing that running is it's such a appetite suppressant, having these like macro goals to strive for, it for me, and I know everyone is so different. For me, it was a huge game changer.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it is for most athletes. I think it's, having just something objective to look at and aim for that. I mean, we do that with, running. We have paces that we have pace goals. We do it in so many other aspects of our life. So with nutrition, there's nothing wrong with doing that. However, and giving some athletes numbers can be a bit triggering. So, just showing these athletes, like, you don't need to focus on numbers. Let me show you what a day of eating looks like on a long run day. If you're running, 15 to 20 miles on a Saturday, like, here's what you should be eating that day. And it's usually pretty eye-opening of how many carbohydrates, how much protein, that you actually need.
Yeah. And it does become intuitive. After many years of 2-ish years of eating that way, I don't count every day. Like I don't count anything. Yeah. It becomes intuitive. So I think that's the shift. It's like it's the shift in everything. It's not just nutrition. It's not just lifting. It's not just running. To do something new and to reach a new goal, you have to go outside your comfort zone and you have to do something new and you have to change your lifestyle to some degree, but it does become part of who you are eventually.
Yeah. Those habits start to set in and then you realize too how good you feel.
And it can happen pretty quickly. Right. It's amazing how quickly we can adopt new habits. It's just, you have to really put in the work at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a go-to pre-training snack meal that you love, Mary?
I don't know. I just
mix it up.
I eat my breakfast and I go. I feel like I like those more in the solid bars. I really like those.
Oh yeah. I haven't tried those yet.
They're really good. Yeah. I like them. So yeah, otherwise, no, especially with lifting, like I think running, I think I speak for a lot of runners where you kind of have to be a little bit more sensitive to like what you're putting in your tummy before you head out the door. So running wise, I'm usually like oatmeal and UCAN or something like that.
Yeah.
With lifting, I'm just going to roll in and get this done.
Yeah. And then what about, do you have go-to either things you make or bring or products that you like to use during your longer runs for fueling and hydration?
Yeah. On my longer runs, I'm a big fan of Morton. I will do a mixture of the hydrogel, the liquid and the gel. So like I'll always have a bottle of something. I used to be such a weenie about carrying something. And then I finally just sucked it up a few years ago and have never looked back. So I'll usually do a bottle of usually the 320. And then if the run's long enough, then bringing in gel too. I'm not a super sweaty runner, so I'm not like crazy scary about sodium. So yeah, that's usually my long run stuff.
Talking about carrying stuff. So this is something I'm sure, Kristen, you probably noticed it too. The runners hate carrying stuff, hate it.
Well, I did for years. I still do. I'm going to be blatantly honest. I stash bottles. Yes. I hate carrying, but yes, you need to have access to some sort of hydration. I mean, it's so many runners go out for, some 90+ minutes without any hydration.
Yeah. Do you use are you carrying a standard bottle or does it have a little strap on it or?
Yeah, I will tell everyone I coach, I have the Nathan Exo Shot 18 ounce, and it collapses. So when I'm done with it, when I'm done with it, I just tuck it in a strap of my sports bra and I forget about it. It's amazing. It's so light. And then they do have a 14 ounce one. So on shorter runs, if it's really hot, I'll bring the 14 ounce one and I'll put a high sodium, like a liquid IV or a scratch in that bottle. And I'll go out the door. I mean, I don't know, you get kind of used to carrying something in the summer.
Yeah.
Every single day. Cause it's so hot.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's super helpful for probably many people, because I think that's something a lot of runners run into, no pun intended, but yeah, they don't want to carry stuff. So whether it's like some people will try the vest, but then not everybody loves the vest,
Right.
or I mean, everybody I talked to seems to not be a fan of the belts, just like the bouncing and all that stuff. So
when I started running, I was a belt person through and through.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to graduate to the collapsible flask.
I like that idea, and tucking it into your strap. I think that's pretty smart. And then what about your post-training recovery? What does that typically look like for you?
I started using Momentous a few years ago, and I'm sponsored by Momentous. I love them. I use they technically do have an on run. They call it Fuel. But I'll be totally honest, that obviously isn't what I use on my runs. But I do drink that when I'm having a low carb day. If I'm like, oh, I'm running a lot, I'm doing a lot of activities, I'm running here and there, I need extra carbs and I just don't have time to eat more, I will just drink it because I think it tastes really good. It's extra carbs, it settles well. That's kind of my, like, I don't know. If I'm just doing a lot and just need more carbs, I drink them.
I think a lot of athletes forget you can drink your carbs as well. I think people are scared of it. They think, oh, if you drink carbs, then it's sugar and that's not good. But it is hard for some athletes to reach their carbohydrate goal with actual carbs because they can be pretty filling. So I always encourage athletes, like, it's okay to drink your carbs.
Yeah. So Momentous has it's literally called Fuel, and I love how it tastes.
Nice.
And they have I'm okay with whey. I can tolerate that. So I'm like religious after my workout, whey and water and creatine, done.
Nice. I like that. I like that you include the creatine post too. I think that's important for a lot of people to hear, but also just there's so much amazing research coming out on creatine, also specific to women. So, and the importance there. So I think that's great. I think there's a fear of like any water weight gain that can come with creatine and stuff like that. So you never experienced any of that? No GI issues, nothing?
Never. No.
Awesome. So let's move on to, you had a recent surgery, and can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, whole experience.
Sure. So I have been dealing with, I was dealing with something on the right side, for a very long time. And, it moved around, and it was a really confusing injury. I think one thing that I've encountered from other athletes who have messaged me about, pelvic injuries and that area is it's so confusing. And often you will get dismissed by doctors because it's like, oh, you just have this disorder or whatever. And it's because they don't know. And I didn't know. And so for me, it was a multi-year quest of figuring out what was wrong. Started with hamstring. And to be honest, it could have been each of these things. And then I'm praying that this is the root, and this being a labral tear and impingement FAI surgery. But I had hamstring tendinopathy, for which I got PRP injections back in 2017. When I had my baby in 2019, I was dealing with a lot of SI joint instability and pain, that I definitely was able to resolve from strength training. And then I always had this this deep hip pain. I always used to use words like, it feels like my hip's coming out of its socket, and it feels like there's sand in my hip, and it feels crunchy. So those are all things that I've been saying for years, but always thinking like, oh, it's probably just your SI joint, just keep getting stronger. And then after my second baby, I had a second baby about a year ago, this past year was never great. I had I kind of had accepted that I would just live at a level 1 pain for the rest of my life. I was like, this is just how it is. It's my SI joint. I just have to keep getting stronger. If it creeps to a level 2 or 3, then I need to do more strength training. And I just was, I don't know, I had resolved to that being the problem. And, but postpartum number 2, it just always kept creeping up. I was having pain on my runs, which never happened before. It was becoming a lot more prevalent and creeping to that higher pain threshold that I mentioned. And so I got a cortisone injection in March of this past year into my bursa.
Wow.
And between March and June, I ran completely pain-free. It was amazing. And I had COVID in June, and about a week after I felt better from COVID, it was as though the COVID knocked every ounce of the cortisone out. It was gone.
Interesting. Wow.
And it was so dramatic that I was now waking up in pain, walking in pain. It had gotten to a point that it had never been before.
Wow.
So I messaged my doctor. I said, let's see what's going on. Like, it's now gotten to a point where I'm a little concerned. We got more imaging and a lot looked wrong. It was a very confusing path this past summer. Initially, there was a pubic ramus stress reaction. But I was like, but that doesn't hurt, that seems odd. But there also was this labral tear. And the first messaging I got was like, oh, it's the stress fracture. Stop doing everything. And I was like, gosh, this just seems odd. And when you looked at the MRI from a few years ago, so I had also had a stress reaction in my femur a few years ago, that pubic ramus signal was there. And so I was like, I don't have pubic pain. Nothing was that. I have deep joint pain. I don't have bone pain. So I told him that, and he said, there's actually joint inflammation. It seemed as though every time I went back into his office, there was like a new finding on the MRI. It was very, very frustrating. So at one of my appointments, he found a cyst in my joint, and he was like, oh, this could be causing you pain. Why don't you see a specialist? So I got bounced to a specialist. And at that point, I had done my homework, and I was going to a PT because I kind of thought the writing on the wall was labral issue, being a labral issue. And the specialist, the surgeon, was like, this is definitely a labral tear. You also have an impingement. You're a great candidate for surgery. Think about it. And at that point, all of the pieces started coming together. The pubic ramus, there was a stress reaction there. It wasn't symptomatic, but it's because of the instability in the hip. I had a femoral stress reaction in 2020 because of the instability in the hip.
Wow.
Like, I had years ago sacral edema, a stress reaction because of all the instability in the hip. So everything started kind of like adding up and making sense. And all of my symptoms, me saying my hip's coming out of its socket, but it makes sense because it was coming out of its socket.
My gosh. Wow.
So hearing him say, you are a good candidate for surgery, I can't tell you how well I slept that night, because I was like, oh my God, it's so validating.
Yeah.
And by the way, a week before I saw him, I did get another cortisone shot, which did nothing.
Wow. Shoot.
That's so interesting. Did you ever speak with him about, like, potentially, because I've had cortisone shots, and they don't last forever. However, I've never had one just all of a sudden, bam. Usually it's like a slow progression of, like, the pain starts again. Was there any correlation to COVID? Do you know?
Yeah, there's not. I honestly just don't think there's enough information about COVID. I mentioned it. It's in my charts. Every time I said something, they nodded their heads. So I will say anecdotally, my PT also said as well, he has seen a lot of patients post-COVID dealing with injury flare-ups, increased inflammation.
It must be that inflammatory response that you get.
Exactly.
It's COVID's been tricky. It's hard with athletes too, of like, how soon can I get back to running? And it's like, well, we have no proven research on how long you should be out. Everyone's such an individual. Everyone's different on how much time you should take off and how you should get back in. So
yeah, absolutely. And for me, I did hit a point in the summer, like pre-MRI and all of, like, when things started going downhill, there was a post-COVID moment when things seemed to be improving. But again, it was still at that level 1, level 2 pain that I'd always been in. So, but at this point, I was already on my path to investigating what was going on. So I was like, well, I'm going to keep seeing what's going on, even though I actually feel much, much better. So when I finally got doctors saying, yeah, well, there's actually you can do about this level 1 pain, this that you've been dealing with for years. I just like my brain exploded. I was like, hell yeah, I want to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I immediately, I have as I'm sure a lot of runners have, just a very addictive personality, a type A. I'm going to research everything, understand everything, make sure I have a complete grasp of what I'm getting myself into. So I looked into my surgeon, I looked into the surgery, I understood the complications that could happen. And I felt very confident about going the surgical route. And after my appointment, I said, sign me up, let's do it. And he at the appointment said, do you want to think about it? And I had gone into that appointment with written questions, like on a pad of paper, and he pauses and he goes, you've already thought about it, haven't you? I'll have my scheduler call you.
Oh my gosh. Nice.
So she called me and it was basically like, you can get it done next Friday, or you can get it done in a month and a half or a month.
Wow.
And I was like, fuck it. Next week, whatever,
Oh
I'm not going to change my mind. The surgeon is excellent. I have my full trust in him. The amount of people that had great recommendations for him and his work were very, very high. And I just felt confident about that path. And I knew that waiting for an extra month would be excruciating. So
yeah,
long story short, they repaired the labrum, which I was very grateful for. They actually found a lot more damage than anticipated. I was told post-surgery, I almost needed a reconstruction, which is basically where they go in and graft in a new labrum.
Wow.
It would have meant about a month and a half on crutches as opposed to just a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And he managed to repair it instead of reconstruct it, which
amazing.
So grateful for. And then they shaved down the area of bone that caused the tear, what they call impingement. So I had the bone shaving. And then while they were in there, I also got a bursectomy for bonus points, just because I've been having bursa pain for years and he's in there already.
Nice.
So yeah, the surgery it was a lot. But I'm 4 weeks post-op this week, and
wow.
I am still, my mind is blown at how good I feel. And I'm so grateful.
So good to hear.
It's really just like, I'm so grateful that I took this path, and it's still going to be so long, but to just not be in pain anymore. I can sit on the floor with my kids and not have pain. It was becoming the pain and the issues were interfering with everyday life, and running or not. Just to be a good mom. And that was not okay with me. So, it just, and I think also too, mental health, when it comes to pain, people don't talk about that, and how much of your mental health takes a stab because you're just in pain and
you can't forget it. You can't,
and no one else is living in your body.
Mm-hmm.
No one else sees you. And it's really challenging. It's really hard. And I think that's probably the biggest part of injury and chronic injury, surgery or not, like when you're dealing with pain day in and day out, and it's affecting your ability to be a good human. Man, it sucks.
Yeah. Makes it harder to be a good human, without a doubt. Put a smile on your face, right? With the post-surgery period, I want to be mindful of time. So I think this will be our last question today, but how did you intentionally change any of your nutrition or supplement routine to help with the recovery post-surgery process?
I increased my collagen intake. So Momentous has an excellent collagen peptides product. And I started doubling my dose every day, taking one in the morning, one in the evening. Particularly the research suggests like pre-PT is a great time to take it. So, hard to be perfect. Consistency is better than perfection.
Yes. Awesome.
That's pretty much it. Everything else is the same, eating the same.
That's
just
great.
More collagen.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, it sounds like your diet obviously was really good before. It wasn't a whole lot of changes to make post. So this has been great. I mean, we covered so much stuff, and then I feel like we still had so many other questions for you, but I want to be mindful of your time today. So let's see, where can people find you and follow you?
I am On Instagram, it's a marathon. So I was about to say you can message me anytime, but that's actually where messages go to die. So if you want to if you want to get in touch, please email me. Actually, it's mary@Lift.Run.Perform.com, or it's a marathon@gmail.com. Both are great places. And awesome. Lift.Run.Perform is the business, our coaching service, and Lift.Run.Perform is on Instagram at that handle.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mary. This was amazing. Thanks, super informative. I love all the strength talk. I think that's super important, and the injury recovery and just being aware of the body. So I think this is going to be great for our listeners. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.